The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. It is a polite reverence, taking off your hat, being on your best behavior. So, if God demands yira, it seems like he is demanding a relationship built on cowering submission. You keep your head down, you follow the rules, you hope he does not notice you. That is a completely reasonable reading based on modern definitions. But when you actually turn the pages of the wisdom literature, that reading breaks, it shatters against the text itself. Because the writers of Proverbs consistently link the fear of the Lord to outcomes that cowering anxiety can never, ever produce. Look at Proverbs 14:26. In the fear of the Lord one has strong confidence, and his children will have a refuge. Notice the collision of words. Fear producing strong confidence. Fear building a safe shelter. Then read Proverbs 19:23. The fear of the Lord leads to life, and whoever has it rests satisfied. He will not be visited by harm. Fear leading to rest. Fear leading to deep satisfaction. The second strategy is rejection. Think about the mechanics of an abusive relationship. If a dictator wants you terrified, you do not rest. You do not feel strong confidence. You obsess over appeasement. You walk on eggshells. You spend every waking moment trying to predict the tyrant's mood so you can survive the day. Anxiety becomes your baseline. The biblical text describes the exact opposite reality. The fear of the Lord does not act like a predator in the dark. It acts like the anchor of a massive ship in a brutal storm. The anchor is heavy. It is unyielding. It demands respect. You do not play with it. People read the word fear, and they immediately picture an abusive dictator in the sky, a deity who demands you cower in the corner, anxious and terrified of making a single mistake. But you are not anxious about the anchor. The anchor is the very thing that allows you to sleep in the cabin while the wind howls outside. Because the fear of the Lord is not the fear that God is going to capriciously hurt you. It is the absolute, settling certainty that God is good, that his moral order holds firm, and that stepping outside of it is mangle what will destroy you. When you submit to the anchor, the anxiety stops. The panic of trying to navigate your own life disappears. The fear of the Lord is not the presence of anxiety, it is the end of it. Step out of the Proverbs and walk up the massive stone steps of the temple in ancient Jerusalem. You are surrounded by the thick smell of burning incense. You can physically feel the vibration of the Levite choirs in your chest. They look at that phrase and say, "If God is love, why does he want me to be afraid of him?" The architecture is towering, designed intentionally to make you feel small. You are approaching the place where the creator of the cosmos has chosen to put his name. The required physical posture is bowing. The internal posture is awe. If you grew up hearing the stories of Mount Sinai, you know what happens when God gets close. The mountain shakes. The sky goes black with smoke. A boundary line is drawn in the dirt, and crossing it means death. The historical memory of Israel is that the presence of God is overwhelmingly, lethally dangerous to anyone with unclean hands. But listen to what the poets of Israel actually sing in this space. Both of those readings are wrong. Psalm 25, verse 14, "The friendship of the Lord is for those who fear him, and he makes known to them his covenant." Read that again. The friendship of the Lord. The Hebrew word translated as friendship is sod. And it is worth slowing down for, because friendship in modern English sounds casual. It sounds like two guys getting coffee. That is not sod. The word points to a private council, an inner circle. It was used in the ancient Near East to describe the closed-door meetings of kings, the secure rooms where state secrets were whispered and battle plans were drawn. To be invited into the sod is to be granted exclusive, privileged access to the mind of the sovereign. And who gets in? Those who fear him. The sanitized version turns a massive, life-altering force into mere manners. Notice the absolute paradox. In normal human experience, if someone possesses the power to destroy you, you back away. You build a wall. You put distance between yourself and the threat. But in the theology of the Psalms, this specific kind of fear, this yaira, is the exact mechanism that draws you into the inner room. Because in a covenant context, fear is loyalty. It is the fierce, uncompromising allegiance to one king above all others. When you fear the Lord, you are publicly declaring that no other nation, no other idol, and no other earthly threat holds final authority over your life. You are His completely. And when a king knows you are entirely loyal to his throne, he does not keep you at a distance. And the dictator version turns a relationship of deep intimacy into psychological abuse. He brings you close. He tells you his secrets. This changes the entire landscape of worship. The fear of the Lord is not the opposite of intimacy. It is the prerequisite for it. You cannot have a whispered conversation with the maker of the universe if you treat his presence like a casual commodity. The awe is what makes the whisper possible. But what happens when the equations fail? Proverbs gives you the baseline rules. It tells you that if you work hard, you will eat. If you cheat, you will fall. Neither of those concepts matches what the ancient Hebrew writers actually meant. But anyone who has lived long enough knows that the world does not always follow the math. Enter the book of Ecclesiastes. If Proverbs is a father teaching his son how to build a good life, Ecclesiastes is an old man staring into the ashes of a fire, telling you that eventually it all burns down. The author looks at the world under the sun and delivers his devastating verdict. The Hebrew word he uses to describe reality is hevel. Your English Bible probably translates it as vanity or meaningless. But the literal word is physical. It means vapor, smoke, a breath on a cold morning. Imagine standing by a fire and trying to grab a handful of smoke. You can see it, you can smell it, which means we are missing the foundation of biblical wisdom. But when you close your fist, your fingers hit your palm. There is nothing there. That is how Ecclesiastes describes the human pursuit of control. You build an empire and you die, leaving it to an heir who squanders it. You live a righteous life, but a corrupt judge destroys your family. You accumulate wealth, and disease takes your health anyway. The wise man dies. The fool dies. The dirt swallows them both. The moral predictability of Proverbs breaks apart in the brutal chaos of the real world. If this phrase is truly the beginning of knowledge, what does it actually demand? It is all smoke. So if nothing under the sun is stable, what do you hold on to? If the universe is not obligated to reward your good behavior, why be good at all? Why not just join the corruption, grab whatever pleasure you can, and wait for the end? The writer of Ecclesiastes spends 12 chapters stripping away every human comfort. He demolishes money, legacy, pleasure, and ambition. He leaves you standing in the ruins. And then, at the very end of the scroll, when the demolition is complete, he hits bedrock. The end of the matter. All has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. It is one of the most famous sentences in the history of human thought. To find out, we are going to trace exactly how this concept functions across the ancient wisdom literature. Notice what survives the fire. When the world stops making sense, the fear of the Lord is the final, irreducible anchor. It is the one thing the smoke cannot touch. You do not fear God because it operates like a cosmic vending machine, guaranteeing you a wealthy, painless life. Ecclesiastes brutally proves that it does not. You fear God because he is the only permanent reality. When every earthly structure fails, when justice is delayed, and when your own body begins to break down, his moral order remains. Here, the fear of the Lord ceases to be just a moral guardrail. It becomes your existential gravity. Proverbs, Psalms, and Ecclesiastes, it holds you to the earth when a chaotic world tries to blow you away. We have spent centuries trying to solve a problem that the ancient writers never had. We looked at the fear of the Lord and saw a contradiction. We thought we had to choose between a God of love and a God of terror. So we either watered the language down until it meant nothing more than taking off a hat in church, or we walked away entirely because we refused to worship an abusive dictator in the sky. But the wisdom literature refuses both of those modern inventions. Proverbs tells us, "Yira is the death of arrogance." It is the gritty, practical hatred of the evil that destroys human flourishing. The Psalms reveal it as fierce covenant loyalty, the exact prerequisite for entering the sod, the private council room of the king. And Ecclesiastes proves it is the heavy anchor of reality when everything else under the sun turns to vapor. To see what the text really means when it tells you to be afraid, which means the fear of the Lord is not an emotion you are supposed to suffer through. It is the posture that sets you free. It is the end of the exhausting modern attempt to be the center of your own universe. When you finally concede that you did not build this world, you stop trying to control it. You drop your defenses. You bend your neck. You let the anchor hold you in the storm. Those words stitched into living room pillows and carved into stone above university libraries are not a threat. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. That is not a warning. It is an invitation. It is the invitation to stop pretending you are God and to finally step onto the only solid ground that exists. To understand what the wisdom writers were actually demanding, you have to strip away centuries of English baggage and look at the language they were speaking. If this journey through the text changed how you see this concept, the biggest thing you can do is subscribe, leave a comment, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. That is genuinely how people find this content, and we depend on you to spread the word. Please keep us in your prayers. God bless you. The Hebrew word we translate as fear is yira, and it is not a flat, single-dimensional word. It is a spectrum. At one end of that spectrum, yira absolutely means terror. It is the visceral, physical dread of imminent destruction. When Jacob hears that his estranged brother Esau is marching toward him with an army of 400 men, the text says Jacob was in great yira, he was terrified. That is not polite respect. That is a racing pulse, a dry mouth, and the sudden, bodily realization that you are about to be wiped off the map. You can find it stamped on university crests. It is the human response to a violent, uncontrollable threat. But as you move along the spectrum of Hebrew thought, the word stretches. It begins to describe something else, not just the reaction to danger, but the reaction to staggering scale. Think about standing on the edge of a sheer cliff, or watching a massive storm front roll across the ocean, pulling the sky down to the water. The physical sensation in your chest is heavy. You are acutely aware of your own fragility. But you are not necessarily running for your life. You are gripped by the sheer weight of what you are looking at. You are paralyzed by awe. That, too, is yira. It is the human reaction to encountering a reality so massive, so completely disproportionate to your own size that it demands absolute attention. This is where the wisdom literature makes its move, cross-stitched in living rooms. When Proverbs or the Psalms talk about the fear of the Lord, they take this word, this profound sense of overwhelming scale and ultimate consequence, and they shift its function. In ancient Israel, yira stops being merely an involuntary emotional reflex. It stops being something that just happens to you when lightning strikes or an army appears on the horizon. It becomes a choice. The wisdom writers frame the fear of the Lord as a deliberate, structural orientation of the self. It is the conscious decision to align your life with the reality that God is God and you are not. It means living with the constant waking awareness that the universe has a center and you are not occupying that seat. This is not an emotion you feel, it is a posture you take. And understanding that difference changes everything about how the rest of the Bible functions. Because if fear is just an emotion, it fluctuates, it spikes and drops depending on your mood, and quoted in almost every church in the world. But if the fear of the Lord is a structural posture, a chosen alignment to reality, then it becomes the solid ground upon which every other human action is built. Open the book of Proverbs, and you immediately hit a wall right in the prologue. Chapter 1, verse 7. It is the thesis statement for the entire collection. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. Notice the claim. The writer is making an argument about epistemology, about how human beings actually acquire true knowledge. In the modern world, we think of knowledge as data accumulation. You read books, you run experiments, you gather facts. Your moral state does not matter. A thoroughly corrupt person can still be a brilliant mathematician. But Proverbs completely rejects that model. The biblical writers argue that you cannot truly understand the universe if you are actively rebelling against the one who built it. Which brings us to a crucial Hebrew word, beginning. The text says, fear is the beginning of knowledge. The word there is reshith, and we usually misunderstand it. We hear beginning, and we think of a starting line. Step 1, you learn the alphabet and then you leave it behind to read a novel. You learn the fear of the Lord and then you graduate to higher, more complex spiritual truths. That is not what reshith means. In Hebrew, reshith is the principal part, the foundation, the root system of a tree. But if you pay attention, it is also a sentence that makes modern people deeply uncomfortable. You never graduate from the root system. If the root dies, the branches wither. If you remove the fear of the Lord, whatever knowledge you build on top of it will eventually collapse into self-destruction. Hold on to that structural reality. Now look at the second half of the verse. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. Who is the fool? In English, a fool is someone who lacks intelligence, someone a little slow. But the Hebrew word used here, iwil, has nothing to do with IQ. An iwil is someone who is stubbornly, aggressively arrogant. It is a physical posture of defiance, a stiff neck, a clenched jaw. The fool looks at the moral boundaries of reality and says, I know better. I set the rules. Do you see the contrast? The fool cannot learn because his posture is entirely closed. He is already full of himself. There is no room for instruction. But the one who fears the Lord has adopted the exact opposite posture. Yira, the staggering awareness of your own smallness before God. When you genuinely realize you are not the creator, your defenses drop. Your hands open, your neck bends, you become entirely teachable. That is why the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. It is the death of arrogance. It is the baseline admission that you are a created being living in a world you did not design, because we do not know what to do with that word, fear. Until you concede that reality, no amount of data will make you wise. But the Hebrew mind never leaves a concept trapped in the head. Teachability is internal. But true wisdom has to move. It has to take on flesh, enter the marketplace, and dictate where you place your feet. In Proverbs chapter 8, wisdom is personified as a woman crying out in the crowded streets, begging humanity to listen. And in verse 13, she defines her terms. She delivers a statement that changes the entire definition of our subject. The fear of the Lord is hatred of evil. Pride and arrogance and the way of evil and perverted speech I hate. Notice the equation. The fear of the Lord is hatred. That sounds jarring to modern ears. We are conditioned to think of fear as a passive emotion of retreat and hatred as a toxic emotion of aggression. But in the moral architecture of Proverbs, hatred is a boundary line. It is a survival mechanism. If you do not hate evil, you will eventually make peace with it. You will tolerate it, then you will justify it, and then you will become it. By defining fear as the hatred of evil, Proverbs pulls Yira out of the realm of abstract theology and drops it directly into your hands. Think about how this actually works in the physical world. So we try to fix it. We usually adopt one of two strategies. Proverbs is obsessed with spatial realities. It constantly warns about paths, snares, deep pits, and hidden traps. Imagine walking a narrow mountain ridgeline in the dark. If you have absolutely no fear, you walk recklessly. You ignore the crumbling stone beneath your boots. You step too close to the edge, and you fall. In that environment, fear is not your enemy. Fear is the thing that sharpens your vision. It dictates your posture. It is the internal alarm system that keeps you alive. The fear of the Lord acts as a moral guardrail on a dark road. It is the firm refusal to step into the ditch. When an ancient Israelite merchant stood at his stall, he had a choice. He could keep 2 sets of stone weights in his pouch, a heavy set for buying and a light set for selling. It was a common ancient trick. If a foreigner walked up, the merchant could easily tip the scales, skim a little extra profit, and no one in the village would ever know. Why would he refuse? Why would he use honest weights when cheating was safe? Not because he possessed a vague modern sense of being a good person. He refused because he feared the Lord. His awe of the God who demands justice actually stopped his hand from reaching for the false stone. The first is to sanitize it. We tell people, usually young people, that in the Bible, this phrase just means respect. That is what the fear of the Lord looks like in motion. It is not cowering in a sanctuary. It is the deeply practical, gritty, daily choice to turn your back on self-destruction. It is the hatred of the things that unravel human flourishing, precisely because you are intensely loyal to the God who holds it all together. It is here that we have to stop and face the most common objection to this entire concept, and it is a fair one. If the fear of the Lord means living with a constant, heavy awareness of his moral boundaries, does that not just create a religion of anxiety? Are we not just describing a hostage situation? You obey the dictator because the dictator holds the power. You do not cheat the scales because you are terrified of the lightning bolt. In our modern psychological framework, fear is a toxic state. It spikes cortisol. It triggers the fight-or-flight response. It destroys trust. A trauma psychologist will tell you accurately that you cannot be intimately connected to someone you are chronically afraid of.